Thank you for to the organizers of SenSem for inviting me here today. It is with great pleasure that I'm here. Previously, before I joined National Climate Change Secretariat, I was with NRF for about 2 years, and I was actually the head of CREATE. So I'm quite familiar with some of the work that the SenSem scientists have done over these years, and it is quite a bittersweet moment for me today to see the end of SenSem, sort of, but I'm still very heartened that there's a lot of research work that's still ongoing in other forms, in other ways. That's collaborations within the CREATE programs itself, and also with our local universities and agencies. So I would like to actually congratulate SenSem, and I hope to see more of such research coming out in Singapore. So I'll try to keep my presentation brief. Because being an ex-scientist, policy work and everything can get a bit too tiring, especially after lunch. So I'll try not to put anyone to sleep. Okay, so my talk will be centered on these three key things. Basically, I'll just give you a quick overview of why climate change actually matters to Singapore. After all, Singapore is such a small country. And our emissions just takes up about 0.11% of the total gas emissions in the world. Next, I'll go through with you some of our mitigation strategies before just wrapping things up, looking at what our adaptation measures that we've done over the years. So as I mentioned, Singapore is very small, and I think the previous speaker, Dr. Serena, also mentioned that we're also highly dense. To add on to what she said, maybe to give you some perspective, Singapore is about 1/10 the size of Shanghai, but our population density is twice that of Shanghai. So we're very, very densely populated. And to make matters worse, we're actually a low-lying island city-state. We lack natural resources, and also we don't have a good source of water, and we're highly urbanized. Most of our energy needs are imported from our neighboring countries, and we are also dependent on fossil fuels. More recently, we felt the impact of climate change, not only through flash floods back in 2010 and even 2011 and 2013. Lately, in this past June itself, we felt that, I'm sure all of you have felt that the temperature has gone really, really, really hot. I've seen some days which was 35 degrees, and really I can't help but turn on my air condition on those days. Sorry, did I just click on something? Can I just, oops. This is when technology fails me. Yeah? Yes, thanks. Yeah. And in 2015, you see that there was a case where the plankton bloom occurred due to the hot weather. For us, as I mentioned, although we're a small country and our emissions don't really make up such a big proportion of the total world emissions, we still do our part to be a responsible citizen. We take part in we contribute our international efforts through the United Nations Convention, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And in 2015, we actually played a crucial part in negotiating the Paris Agreement between some of the big major parties. So we're quite proud of that. And as of February this year, there are about 132 countries that have ratified the Paris Agreement, which makes up about 80% of our total gas emissions. For Singapore, we've made a pledge for 2030 pledge, which is to actually reduce our emissions intensity by 36%. From our 2005 levels, and we also intend to peak in 2030 and to stabilize our emissions, which is actually a very big, ambitious plan for us. considering that we are actually resource constrained and we are dependent on our energy imports. Some of the strategies later on that I'll go through quickly with you involves improving energy and carbon efficiency, reducing our carbon emissions in our power generation, developing and deploying low carbon technology, and of course the last thing is to make sure that not only do we increase awareness with the public, but to get everyone together to make sure that we actually achieve our pledge. Before we actually set out to plan our strategies, we actually looked at what was Singapore's emissions profile, just to give us an idea of where were the big emitters in Singapore. And this diagram actually shows you that the industry sector actually takes up the biggest part of the pie, which makes up about 51% of our gas emissions, which is then also followed closely with the power sector. So these are the two main big gas emitters in Singapore. And when we came out with our pledge, it was actually a concerted effort throughout government where a lot of agencies, various agencies were involved, such as the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Finance, National Development, Trade and Industry, and also the Transport and NRF. So this was actually a very big collaboration that we had to work together towards achieving the same aim, which was to put out a pledge that we could, that was ambitious, but yet something that we can work towards. And part of this working group that was set up, the organization that we set up, it's called the Interministerial Committee for Climate Change. There were actually 3 working groups under it, and the 3 working groups looked at the international negotiations part, the mitigation part, and also the adaptation. So for mitigation work, there were as I mentioned earlier, the power sector actually took up a lot of the bigger part of the pie of our emissions. And for mitigation working group, they looked at it and they came up with the following strategies to promote more energy efficiency in our power generation, such as waste-to-energy plants. Such plants would help us to optimize our resource and energy recovery. There's also plans to have the co-location of integrated waste management facility. This will be located in Tuas, together with the water reclamation plant that PUB has over there. So besides the waste-to-energy plants, we are also encouraging more solar deployment in Singapore. We aim to actually double our solar deployment up to 350 megawatt peak by 2020, and thereafter 1 gigawatt peak. And this is, we expect to do this with the help of the Solar Nova program. PUB is also involved in test bedding floating solar panels because, as you know, Singapore is very land scarce. We don't have many places where we can actually put the solar PV. So looking elsewhere besides rooftops, having them on reservoirs is another way of us trying to find more space for the solar panels. For waste and water, a lot of our colleagues in PUB have also, PUB and NEA, are working to help to promote and increase the recycling rate up to 70% by 2030. And for the water treatment, wastewater treatment, there's plans to pilot a co-digestion of food waste with water sludge. And this is expected to help us generate twice the amount of electricity for our demands. For households, we also have, NEA has also introduced a lot of schemes over the years. Some of them involve the minimum energy performance standards, which helps to ensure that appliances that we have out there in the market actually meet certain energy performance levels and standards. There's also the mandatory energy labeling scheme, where it allows consumers, it provides consumers with information on the appliances that they wish to purchase so that they can make a more informed choice. There's also plans to have a pilot program to introduce smart home technologies, and one of the places where they're thinking of doing this is in Yuhua, the HDB estate. Buildings also play a big part in helping us mitigate our carbon dioxide emissions. BCA has been very aggressive in ensuring that most of our buildings today actually meet Green Mark standards. So as of today, it's 31% of our buildings are Green Mark certified, but they aim to have it 80% by 2030. BCA is also encouraging a lot of the building tenants to retrofit some of the older buildings. And this would also help in improving the energy efficiency of the buildings. And as we know, Singapore is a hub for data centers. We make up about, I think, 30% in Asia alone for most of the data centers being located here. And they also consume a lot of energy. And we don't expect this energy consumption to decrease. In fact, it will increase over time. So a lot of work is being done to see what are the ways and means that we can reduce the energy demand in data centers. There's in fact a tropical data center trial, a pilot, that will study more on this. So for transport, we aim to achieve 75% public transport use during the morning peak hour by 2030, and this is up from 66% in 2015. Ministry of Transport and LTA have intend to actually double their rail network to 360 kilometers by 2030, which is about the rail network density of most of the developed countries. And they also intend to grow the bus fleet by 1,000 buses by 2017. And likewise, the walkway network is expected to quadruple. And we are looking at trying to integrate transport hubs. For private vehicles, we already have the COE and the ERP in place. We are currently reviewing the carbon emissions-based vehicle scheme this year. And there's also the fuel economy labeling scheme. And recently, you might have seen the news that they are piloting the 1,000 electric vehicles, and the LTA are also MOT and LTA are trying to also introduce the 2,000 charging kiosks. So that's one of the ways that for our transport sector is trying to contribute in helping us reduce our carbon emissions. So for industry, we have already in place different schemes and incentives and even financing schemes to encourage the industry players to increase their energy efficiency. Right now, the current manufacturing energy efficiency is about 0.4%. So we're trying to encourage them to go up to about 1 to 2%, which is comparable to other developed countries such as Netherlands or Belgium. And besides those different schemes that are out there, we are also encouraging them to adopt more cleaner fuels. Because in the long run, this sort of, by changing to cleaner fuels, it would prove to be more cost effective for them, for their businesses. And some of you might have heard that last year we announced that we will be introducing an economy-wide carbon tax. The aim of this carbon tax is actually to be applied upstream to the large gas emitters, which is your GenCos. And the main aim of the carbon tax is actually to nudge and to change, to have a behavioral change for our industry sectors, the big players, so that they will shift their business operation and start to adopt more technology or innovation that would improve their energy efficiency. So the carbon tax would probably be introduced in 2019. And in Singapore, we are also constantly trying to make our ecosystem a vibrant place for researchers to help them demonstrate and deploy the technology that they have come up with in the labs. So we have listed here some of the big living labs that are found all around Singapore. There's the Cleantech Park, the Jurong Lake District. I mentioned earlier about the Yew Hua HDB estate. There's also the Eco Campus in NTU, SingPower, the lab, and there's also the EV car sharing program. So there's a lot of living labs located all around Singapore, and we hope to expect to see more of this in the future. For our adaptation strategies, it's very much an iterative process whereby we try to identify the risks that we might face in the case of climate change. And from there on, we formulate a strategy of pathways and measures to address those risks. And these measures will then be monitored and reviewed frequently so that we can keep on adapting to any changes in the environment. But we are also very mindful that our plans must be flexible, taking into account the latest climate science and also interdependencies that might occur that may affect each other and cause the impact to be even greater than expected. So for instance, in 2013, the Ministry of Environment actually launched the Centre for Climate Research Singapore, and this was part of our efforts to build up the local capabilities in climate science. The Centre for Climate Research Singapore helped us produce a study, which was the second national climate change study recently, that they actually looked at some of the climate projections for Singapore all the way up to 2100. And in that study, it showed that Singapore will most definitely experience greater rainfall, increase in sea level, and also with the daily temperatures going up to 4.6 degrees. The 6 areas of risk which we identified, I won't go through in detail with you in interest of time, but you can find more of the information on our website, on NCCS website. But the 6 key areas here that we looked at was, the first was the coast, our coastline. How do we protect our coastline from rising sea levels? The second one was, how do we minimize the floods? Third is protecting our biodiversity, which is actually a very important aspect. The fourth is resilience, which is a bit more indirect. It's more resilience in public health, how the increasing heat might affect like heat stress and productivity in the people, and also our food security. The fifth and the sixth basically looks at how we can maintain and protect our infrastructure and making sure that our essential services keep on running, along with our buildings and our communications are not affected. So just quickly, this was with regards to the coastal line, we've increased the minimum reclamation levels from 3 meters to 4 meters. And for the water, we've ensured that we have holistic stormwater management. There's also, PUB has actually done some work where they've looked at excess rainwater and how they can actually store it underground. We are also looking at increasing our water resource with the building of new water plants and new desalination plants. To protect our biodiversity, there's efforts to restore the mangroves and also the marine conservation area. There's a lot of inspections that will be stepped up with regards to the trees, so that we ensure that the trees are not easily uprooted, and also hotspot patrols. For public health, there's also concern about increase in dengue incidents, and work has also been done to to see how we can mitigate this by introducing the Wolbachia bacteria into the dengue the Aedes mosquito. We have also put in place guidelines to manage heat stress, and we've looked into how we can diversify our food supply. So again, for the infrastructure, flood barriers have been erected just to ensure that our transport system, like the MRT stations, are not affected. We've also, for Changi Terminal 5, it's been raised to about 5.5 meters above the mean sea level. For buildings, there's of course inspections that are done periodically to ensure that the buildings, the slope is stable and the buildings are not impacted by any extreme weather events. As I mentioned, that a lot of work has been done to identify the risks, but there are still gaps that exist in the system in that what about the indirect impacts of climate change? Especially now that we see more increasingly so, such extreme weather events are more frequent. So what would the indirect impacts of climate change lead to? Would it lead to intensification of competition over food, fresh water, and other things like you see climate refugees? So recently we saw in America there was a terrible heat wave in Phoenix. And I think some of you may have seen the reports where flights were being cancelled because the planes couldn't generate enough lift because of the hot air. So these are some of the examples of what I mean by indirect impacts that is really truly unexpected. There's also power outages due to the increased strain on the power system because people were turning on their air condition. And the roads were also buckled in some parts of America, causing a lot of transportation disruptions. I think the main point that I want to say also that for this presentation is what can the scientific community do with regards to climate change. And a lot of the work that's come out that I've seen today and that's come out not only from SENSAM but other parts of the CREATE programs, I'm quite heartened to know that there's a lot of research that we can use. And for the mitigation work, I've just quickly highlighted some work that has come out in the papers. I think some of you know Eric. I think he presented yesterday. He was featured in Straits Times, where he looked at the air quality at bus stops, and that a lot of commuters waiting for buses could have some form of health impact due to the exposure to pollutants. I think there were some suggestions to put fans at the bus stops to allow for the dispersion of the pollutants. So this kind of things that comes out from the research that you do would still, in one way or another, help us to address some of the challenges that we face in our carbon emissions and our mitigation efforts. On your right, this is another research that I wanted to highlight, not from SENSAM, but is another part of SMART, SmartLease. Prof. Tonio, he and his team recently fabricated a solar PV cell that was about 24% in efficiency, which is a very big feat. Right now, that is currently the most efficient solar PV cell out there. The thing is, for his solar PV cell, it costs half the price as what we can find elsewhere overseas. And now he has plans of incorporating this solar PV cell into GPS tracking devices to help logistics companies with the tracking. So he's right now in the process of commercializing his research. This is an example of what we would like to see more of, where it comes to research, where it can actually translate from the lab to the market. And I think the scientific community is already doing a lot of this, and I look forward to more of such efforts in the committee. With regards to vulnerability, I think there's a lot of recent discussions that the impact of climate change may be accelerating much faster than anticipated. or projected by the IPCC and scientists worldwide. We're not sure how we can assess such impact of like melting permafrost that results in emissions of methane. So if someone can actually help to assess such things, that would be very important to us in predicting what's going to happen next. So just to wrap everything up, round out everything, a lot of effort needs to be done with regards to climate change, and the government can't do it alone. We definitely need researchers like yourself to help us, to provide solutions, to provide options, so that we can do our part in trying to help deploy some of these solutions and technologies into the market. Ultimately, our goal is really to help reduce the carbon emissions and actually keep this climate change from going out of hand. So I really thank you for having me today.